So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm very happy today to host the talk of Esteban Marin Avila. He's going to present on ethical problems related to hope and trust, a phenomenological analysis on practical rationality in context of uncertainty, vulnerability, and dependence. So thank you, Esteban, for taking the time to give this talk today. I'm very happy you'll be part of our webinars, and thanks all of you for being here. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ferrarella, for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you, all of you, for your presence. The presentation that I will give is based on an ongoing research. Part of it was published in an article called Hope and Trust as Conditions for Rational Actions in Husserl Studies, like a year ago. But it's part of a more broad research project. And now I am going to project. So the title is it's the title that Dr. Ferrarella read, Ethical Problems Related to Hope and Trust. And the subtitle is Phenomenological Analysis on Practical Rationality in Context of Uncertainty, Vulnerability, and Dependence. So the idea is to reflect on some emotions and some valuings related to those emotions that are necessary for rational actions in concrete contexts, especially in contexts that entail uncertainty, vulnerability, and dependence. But the claim is that all concrete contexts do imply these conditions. So that's the idea. The purpose of the talk, the general one is to introduce a phenomenological considerations concerning practical rationality. And here I will follow Husserl's theory of the three dimensions of rationality, although the talk will be not so technical, and I will reformulate in a non-technical way some of the concepts that I pick up from Husserl. And I wish to argue that practical rationality has an emotional dimension that can be described phenomenologically. Okay, and in particular, one of the points of the presentation is to address this problem, that the ethical problem of what does it mean to act right in concrete situations involves addressing this question: when is it rational to have hope and to trust? So the analysis of hope and trust will allow us to discuss the following ideas. First, that practical rationality depends on valuings that take place in emotional living experiences. Secondly, that we could not act rationally in concrete contexts without adopting certain attitudes that involve emotions and valuings, such as hope and trust. Third, that hope and trust can be subject to rational criticism because it is possible to reflect on them and to examine the validity of the beliefs, valuings, and practical intentions involved in them. And fourthly, that critical reflection on attitudes that involve emotions, such as hope and trust, is necessary for an ethics that takes in consideration the fact that human beings are situated in a social world where the outcome of their actions is uncertain and depends on other persons. And first, a preliminary observation in the sense that the concepts of hope and trust that I will be working with here are not the product of generalizations. They are in some way deducted as possible basic attitudes that involves beliefs, values, and practical intentions, so that they might and surely will adopt different forms in different cultures. However, the point that I wish to stress is that hope and trust do involve beliefs, values, and practical intentions, and that these intentions can be examined concerning their validity. The method is phenomenology. I will expose here the results of the research, a research which is based in Husserlian phenomenology, but I also draw on other authors. The list is there: is Martha Nussbaum, Ernst Bloch, Sarah Heinama, Steinbock, Scheller, Annette Bayer, Susie Ferrarello, Adolf Reinach, Richard Lazarus, and Peter Goldie, among others. I don't wish to present a definition of phenomenology, but to say a few words to the audience that might not be familiarized with this way of raising philosophical problems. Just to say that the task of phenomenology, at least Husserlian phenomenology, is to make explicit the meaning that the world has for us in relation to the way in which it is manifested in our experience of it. And it draws in essential analysis of the objects of inquiry, but also of the ways in which they are manifested. So, for instance, here I will put I will focus on what are values or different kinds of values in relation to the way in which they are manifested. Part of the issue here is that if one wants to address the question of what something is, including values, one has to describe the essential way in which it is manifested. So the focus of the talk in this sense is to highlight essential components of rational actions in context, again, of uncertainty, vulnerability, and dependence. And here I will understand as a meaningful or fully rational action, an action that is rational according to its dimensions of belief, value, and feasibility. The idea is that an action is based on beliefs, is based also on values, and on the practical intentions that can be feasible or not based, but it implies as well practical intentions that can be feasible or not. And it is rational if it is an action that involves rational beliefs, values, and considerations of feasibility. So a meaningful or fully rational action is one that involves beliefs, values, and awareness of feasibility based on the evident experience of the surrounding world in which it is situated. So for an action to be meaningful or fully rational, it is not enough that it is based on rational beliefs and on a rational awareness of its feasibility. It is also necessary that it is directed to goals that the agent can consider valuable. So this is the central point that I wish to make, that to act rationally involves to value rationally. And this involves emotions or some evident feelings. What I will try to do is to show how this happens in hope and trust. But first, to draw the map, let me say again that hope and trust are conditions for meaningful actions in the sense that I have described. Concerning to hope, we could say that when we adopt an attitude of hope, it makes sense to undertake actions that seek to produce a future situation that we cannot fully anticipate and that does not depend on us, or at least not completely. Of course, this is the case when hope is in itself rational, and we will see that later. And then in relation to trust, when we adopt an attitude of trust, it makes sense to refrain to act and to decide certain things and to delegate these practical capacities on others. And this involves that it makes sense to make ourselves vulnerable. When we trust, it makes sense to make ourselves vulnerable. And well, the idea that we cannot explain this, how hope and trust are conditions for meaningful actions, if we do not consider the emotional axiological dimension of reason, and particularly of the rationality of these emotions when they are rational, because I will claim that hope and trust can be rational or irrational, depending on the beliefs involved in them, the practical intentions involved in them, but also the emotions, feelings, and values involved in them. So I will say a few words before going to hope, and to saying a few words of hope. I will say something concerning the rationality of values, which is based mostly in Husserl, also in a Mexican philosopher that was influenced by Husserl, Luis Villoro, mostly. And some things are sort of, I think, implied in some research manuscripts of Husserl, but they are not explicit claims of Husserl. So, well, that the idea is that that something really or truly has value for someone means that she can have evident living experiences of this value. So the question is, how are values given, or how can we have evident living experience of values? What kind of evident living experiences are these? How are values experienced? So there's a group of values which can be called with Husserl joy values or Lustwerten. And I take the other expression sorrow values from Villoro because he claims that we also grasp values when we lack them, and we grasp them as something sorrowful. And the idea is that something is valuable or is evident as valuable when one enjoys or suffers something while perceiving it. And this means when the thing is present. It's not actual, I mean, it's not perception in the colloquial sense, maybe, because perception in this broader sense can involve, to use an example of Husserl, smoking a cigar. That's the perception of the cigar is the act of smoking it. So it's the fact that something is present, and when it is present in this broad sense, we enjoy it. Or when it is not present, we suffer from it. So for these kinds of values, the value is manifested through feelings that can be characterized as pleasurable or displeasing. However, the value is not the pleasure or the displeasing feeling, but something that is manifested as a unity to which the pleasure or displeasure points. Much in the same way as when we perceive something, we have sensations, and the perceived thing is not the sum of the sensations, but something that announces itself through the sensations. The idea is that with joy or sorrow values, something similar happens. We have some feeling mixed with sensations, and these feelings mixed with sensations announce the fact that something is valuable for us in a given situation. So, some examples of joy or sorrow values: the flavor of a cigar or of a beer, the beauty of a landscape, the ugliness of a devastated area, the freshness of a bed, the disturbing noise that frustrates our efforts to concentrate, depth and rhythm of the plot of a novel, clarity and intelligence of a theoretical work, etc. So the range of joy or sorrow values is very, very broad. The value perceived emotionally based on feelings, the value is perceived emotionally based on feelings in a way which is analog to the way in which we perceive real objects based on sensations. So this is the point that I was making before. And the idea for Husserl in several works is that concrete perception actually involves a mixture of sensations and feelings. This sinnliche Gefühle, these sensuous feelings, which are really a mixture of sensation abstract from feeling would be a theoretical construct. The concrete experience is always, I think, according to Husserl, a mixture of feeling and sensation. And well, the idea is that the loss of goods that entail this sort of value can be compensated. So it makes sense to leave some of these values aside if by doing this we can obtain other goods that we value higher, that give us a greater joy, or that we enjoy more, or that are less painful. But there are other values. So the point one is that to value something is to assume that we can find joy in that thing. But we don't only value the things in which we find joy. We also value the well-being of the things that we love. That's the other point. So this I take it from some manuscripts from the volume of Grenzprobleme of Husserliana. This is wrong. It's not 42 also, but also in the studying of the structure of consciousness, we find, I think, some claims in the same sense. Well, the idea is that one finds satisfaction or self-satisfaction in taking care of something or someone. But when we find satisfaction or self-satisfaction in taking care of something or someone, this value is different from the value of joy or of the things in which we find joy. And it can take place without pleasure. That's a central point. So we can find satisfaction in taking care of something that we love or someone that we love, and this can be at the same time not pleasurable, but nevertheless we can value that. We can find value in that. Another point is that the annihilation of something loved affects the identity of the lover. The loss of something loved cannot be compensated. It is always a loss or a sacrifice. And well, the idea is that the love value, or what is valued when we love, is not the same thing as the object of love. When we value someone or something, when we love someone or something, what we value is the well-being and development of the loved person or thing. This value is manifested through the satisfaction or self-satisfaction that we feel when we take care of it or her. And this I take it from, again, from these manuscripts where Husserl in Grenzprobleme talks about the possibility of finding value in taking care of in this case, a mother of her children in the context of basically the end of the world. But also, I take it from some writings of Sarah Hainama, who she argues that when we love someone, what we value is the relationship. And also Scheller has an important point regarding this topic to say that we do not value the empirical object that we love, because we say that we often love persons who we do not believe that are virtuous or so. So it is not a prerequisite for love to find value or a special value in the love thing. However, I do think that when we love something or someone, what we value is the well-being and development for good of this thing or person, which is something I think that is implied in this text of Husserl, and I think he's right. And also, I think that in contrast to joy values, love values are given in the practical experience of taking care of the loved object. So we discovered that we love something or someone when we engage in the practical activity of taking care of this thing or person, that's the experience, and in this experience we find satisfaction or self-satisfaction. Okay, so the idea is to see how these structures hope and trust. Well, just a note before continuing is that the objects of joy and love can be flexible, and basically because joy and love are born of instincts that are in principle not related to objects. This point has been made by Husserl in Studien, and by other Husserlian scholars like Mensch, Lassig, Ferrarello, and also Villoro has a theory about this. And also because our ability to enjoy or to love depends on our ability to perceive or conceive objects of love. This, I think, is implied in Husserl, and it's a point that also Villoro makes. We, in as far as we can conceive different sorts of situations, of objects, etc., we can love them. So, in some sense, desire and love feeds on ideas or on conceptions or on perceptions. So to go to the point of hope, first, I think it can be preliminarily defined as an emotional attitude that involves the motivation to act based on the expectation that it is possible that something valued happens, even if it is not certain or even likely that it will happen. So hope involves an expectation. Here I sort of argue with Steinbock. Steinbock has a very acute analysis of hope in moral emotions. And he claims that hope is not an expectation, but it has a future orientation that is different from an expectation. And here I want to claim that hope involves an expectation, but it is not primarily an expectation. And it is hope and attitude in which there is an expectation involved, but it is an expectation that can be in conflict with other expectations. So examples of the expectations involved in hope. If I forget a bag in the park and I hope to recover this bag by going back to look for it, I can say that I have hope in finding my bag. I hope to find my bag. But at the same time, I can say, well, I hope to find my bag, but I am almost sure that it will be lost. Somebody probably took it or something like that. So I can hope for something that is not the most likely thing that will happen. It is an expectation, but an expectation among others. Or, I don't know, a more political example. I hope that protests will frustrate a real estate project that poses a menace to a forest in the outskirts of my community. However, I might go to the protests and devote much time to it. But however, at the same time, I might believe that politicians and developers will ignore the protests. So I say, I hope that this will have an impact, but I am also aware that this might not be the case. But it's something worth doing. That's part of the point. Even though I know that the chance of having a real effect is remote, I do value it and do consider that it's worth giving a shot. Or another example is I hope to be able to migrate to the US by traveling by land from Central America and crossing several national borders. However, at the same time, I believe that it's unlikely that I will be able to cross the border between Mexico and the USA. So let's think of somebody that travels like a long way from by land, and he crosses, I don't know, Guatemala, Salvador, Nicaragua, and then he is in Mexico, and he still thinks that the hardest border to cross is the one between Mexico and the USA, but he nevertheless gives it a shot. So the idea is that hope has a doxical, an axiological, and a practical dimension. The doxical dimension, which involves beliefs in a very wide sense, is the expectation of a possible future, even if it is unlikely. That's the doxical main dimension. But it also involves a practical dimension or practical intentions, which can be described as being motivated to act with the purpose of favoring the expected possible future, or of enduring while it comes. So when I have hope, I am motivated to act according to the future in which I have hope. I have not necessarily yet acted, but I am motivated to act, inclined to act. Or in some other cases, it might be I am motivated to wait for that future, to resist and wait until it comes. But it also has an emotional axiological dimension, which can be described, I think, as valuing positively the expected possible future and assessing that acting to favor such possibility or enduring while it comes is something worth doing. And what I wish to claim is that this emotional axiological dimension is fundamental for hope to be rational. It doesn't make sense to have hope in things based on false beliefs. It also doesn't make sense to have hope without being motivated to act on it. But it also doesn't make sense to hope in things that we do not think that are worth doing or waiting for. And this is related with feelings. However, well, another point is that hope is often intermingled or based in fear, or well, at least a rational hope is to some extent a higher level apprehension of something that can also be fearsome. And the idea is that the emotional axiological attitude in which we feel that something is the idea is that fear is an emotional axiological attitude in which we feel that something is undesirable or unvaluable in the sense that it should be confronted or avoided. So when we have fear, we have some feelings, and we through those feelings apprehend something as worthy of fighting against it or fleeing from it. And if one thinks of fear in this sense, then rational hopes involves grasping and assessing insightfully the object of love, of hope, and this object can entail also fearsome possibilities, because the hope thing might not come to happen, or if one acts according to what one hopes, something that one fears might happen. So part of the idea is that when one has rational hope, one thinks that that something is worth betting on, even though betting on that thing or rooting for that thing might involve risks that are fearsome. Yeah, well, so the idea is that for hope to be rational, it must be distinct from self-deceit or from a false optimism concerning a situation. Hope can be based on a very rational analysis of a situation that involves fearsome possibilities, and nevertheless one can be hopeful and say, well, even though I know this can happen, when I have hope in this and I act according to this hope, it is worth doing. So hope is a condition to undertake rational actions, again, that would otherwise be irrational. Hope allows us to act rationally in context of uncertainty without attempting to deny such uncertainty. So when one has rational hope, one can be aware that a situation is uncertain and nevertheless act rationally on it, and rationally in this broad sense that involves beliefs, practical intentions, and emotions and values. So hope allows us to cultivate with actions desirable possibilities, even when they are not likely to happen, or when we cannot imagine or conceive them clearly. So because of this, hope is very relevant in intersubjective contexts and in concrete contexts. It makes possible to pursue goals that also depend on the actions of other persons. So this includes all actions insofar as they have an historical or generative dimension. We often act in ways in which the success of our actions depends on the reactions on or in what other persons do. And we could not do this without hope. And there are several actions that would be kinds of actions that would be irrational without hope. For instance, the actions with goals that cannot be clearly imagined or conceived. An example of this will be to compose a written, pictorial, musical, or work of any kind whose content and definite form emerges from the long process of creating it. And hope also makes it possible to act in ways that involve risk, act rationally in ways that involve risk and that are unlikely to be successful. An example of this kind of action that can be rational with hope, but that would be irrational without hope, is, I don't know, to renounce to an unsatisfying work with the hope of earning one's life in some other way that is more fulfilling. I mean, one takes a risk and it might be not successful, but if one has hope, and this involves valuing highly this possibility, it is completely rational. Or another example, more in the line of ecology, is to renounce to a comfortable life, to diminish one's wastes, with the hope of setting an example for others and raise awareness of the importance of significantly reducing the pollution of one's community. That's also an action that is involving a risk and that might be unlikely to be successful, but that is nevertheless rational if one has hope. So when it is rational to have hope, when the beliefs involved in this hope concerning our surrounding world and the expected future are rational, when the practical ponderings concerning how to act in the best possible way to contribute to make such future real are also rational, but also, and this is again the point that I wish to stress, rational hopes involve emotional, axiological, rational assessments concerning the desirability of the expected future and the convenience of acting according to it, considering, of course, the risks involved in rooting for this future. So it doesn't make sense to have hope in something that does not involve a future possibility that we desire or that is related with something that we love. That's the point. So value assessments that determine the rationality of hope and of the actions born out of hope. These values take place in emotional living experience. And what I wish to discuss is the idea that these emotional living experiences in which we value are at least part of the feelings that we usually identify with hope and trust. So the axiological assessment involved in hope takes place through the feelings that we identify with hope. To feel hope is to make an axiological assessment. That's the idea. If it makes sense to attempt to bring about something hoped, something that by definition is merely possible and that can be vague, this depends on how much one values it. And this is independently of the rationality of the beliefs and considerations of feasibility involved in hope. So other examples in which I stress this axiological emotional dimension of hope. If I have something important to do, and then I say, well, nevertheless, I will cancel this activity because I will go to the park to look for my bag because I have hope in finding it, even though I think it is not very likely. This makes sense if I value very highly my bag. If I don't value very highly my bag, this is not rational. It doesn't make sense to do it. Or another example is denouncing an abuse or protesting and suffering the retaliations of denouncing an abuse does not make sense if one does not seek with this act something that values very highly. Justice, a change, to set an example, something of the sort. So these values are at least part of the feelings components of the experience of hope. And well, finally, in relation to hope, I wish to claim that, or to suggest, or to put into discussion, the idea that rational hope can be directed to a future that is vague and that cannot be anticipated in a precise way, which is a trait of hope that is very relevant in context of extreme adversity. An example would be someone diagnosed with a terminal illness and at an advanced age. Let's say something of 90 years old with cancer or something of the like, can have rational hope in fostering a future that is different from the one that seems more imminent. However, in these cases, the expectation in hope can be very vague and undetermined. It can be merely like to have a different sort of future than this imminent and not desirable death that I have before me. For instance, to die in a certain way that is better than the kind of death that seems more likely at the moment. To die after reconciling with someone or something, after having arranged an issue, after having taken care of something loved, etc. So in some cases, rational hope can be can have this very undetermined form, like merely the negation of something that is undesirable and seems imminent, like not to die as I think I will die, or not to have this issue that I am dealing with in the way in which I have it. Something different than this imminent future, even if I don't know exactly what the form of this different possibility, or how exactly the future might be if it is not this most imminent possibility. So I think I have taken taken more time that I expected. How much time do I have left?
It's okay. I mean, we still have 15 minutes. If any of you in the audience have questions, just type them in and I I will stop the talk and maybe insert the question.
Okay.
But,
yeah,
we still have 15 minutes.
Yeah, of course, it could be also, you can interrupt me and I can address some questions if I don't have time to address them at the end. And I will say very shortly, the idea is that trust is a way of acting out of hope. It's a response to hope. Hope is an emotional attitude, which means that when I have hope, I am motivated to act in a certain way. I am living preeminently in an attitude centered on feelings. But when I trust, I am practically engaged with the world. Trust is a practical attitude, but nevertheless, it is based on hope. That's the idea. So it does involve trust valuings, but it is not a valuing attitude. A preliminary definition of trust is to have the practical intention of depending on someone and making ourselves vulnerable before her for the sake of some hope. And well, a preliminary, another point that I take from Steinbock is that while hope can be disappointed or frustrated, trust can always be betrayed. And this speaks of the intersubjective character of trust. Hope can be directed to persons or things, but trust in this sense is interpersonal. And well, it involves vulnerability, which is not a naivete, it's not a belief, but a willingness to depend on the trusted person. And I take from Annette Dyer this idea that trust, or the vulnerability involved in trust, involves renouncing to be on guard against the possible bad will of the trusted person, as well as renouncing to agency and to practical intelligence. Some two very obvious examples of activities of trusting is asking a friend to go to the park and to look for my bag for me. I trust her to do what I would otherwise do. So I renounce some agency and practical intelligence because she can decide whether to look for my bag in a bench or in a tree, and she can take different decisions from the ones I would have taken. Or asking someone to look after my plants and pets while I am away from several days. It's another example of trusting and making oneself vulnerable and renouncing practical agency. Well, the idea is that we do not need reasons to trust, and we are naturally disposed to trust. However, we can adopt a reflective attitude toward our trust, even though we are usually trusting in several directions in our world. Even if we communicate with other persons, this is possible because we trust their sincerity. And so this is something that is not the product of reflection, probably in the same way as hope. Hope is not also the product of a reflective attitude, but it's something that just happens. But we can, in both cases, reflect on these attitudes and make explicit the otherwise tacit beliefs, values, and practical intentions involved in them. So in this sense, I speak of rational trust and rational hope, in the sense that we can illuminate in reflection what is otherwise tacit in these attitudes. It involves also beliefs, practical intentions, and well, I will not touch this topic because I think it's rather obvious and connected with what I have exposed before. But trust also involves an emotional axiological intention, which is assessing that depending on someone and becoming vulnerable before her is something worth doing. In the case of a caregiver or trusting somebody to take care of plants, pets, or children, I assess that trusting the caregiver is something worth doing because I believe that she has goodwill and is capable, and this last point is important, and because I wish to go out or to make a trip. I mean, when we trust is because we desire something or we love something, and this axiological emotional dimension of trust is also important, and it's important for analysis. On the other hand, there's also an emotional axiological dimension in our response to the trust of others. And this is also, I pick up a point made by Steinbock, that when we are trusted by others, we feel obliged to act according to what is trusted to us. And Steinbock puts this example of being in an airport, and somebody wants to go to the bathroom, or to the bathroom, and then she trusts us to look for her bag. And the idea is that when this happens, one feels obliged. And I would add that we feel obliged to comply with this trust or to honor this trust, even if we are not explicitly asked to do this. No, it can be merely that we see that she trusts us and goes to the bathroom and assumes that we will watch for the bag, and we feel obliged. And the idea is that this feeling of being obliged is also something that relates to values and to emotions. But another point is that when we respond with any sort of expression to this trust that is deposited on us, and this feeling obliged, this can be characterized as a sort of promise. So in the example of something that trusts us to look for the bags without asking, if we just nod or say, yes, of course, I think this can be already or thought as a promise. So promises give an explicit form and limit to the trust that we receive. They make possible pacts and contracts, and in that way they make possible to put checks on trust. So being trustworthy is a condition of possibility of establishing social relationships, including social relationships of domination. And this is important because promises, on one hand, seem to be the only social act that does not need to be accepted to be valid. So they make possible requests, orders, declaration, etc. insofar as when an order is valid, it is because we have in some way promised obedience to the person who issues the order. And the same can be said of other social acts. So to be perceived as someone trustworthy involves being able to take part in different sorts of social relationships, including those of domination. So I wish to conclude, sorry, because I was a little bit rushed in this last part, but the idea is that reflection on trust and hope has several ethical implications. One ethical implication is that rational hope is an attitude that makes it possible to act rationally while pursuing alternative futures that are better than the most imminent possibilities. When the most imminent possibilities are undesirable, one can examine in what other possibilities it would be rational to have hope. An example, when the most imminent future seems catastrophic at a global scale because of ecological crises, forced displacement, growing inequality, menace of nuclear war, it makes sense to have rational hope in other least likely possibilities and to root for them and to act according to these other possibilities. A second implication is that examining the rationality of trust makes it possible to adopt a critical attitude toward the things that we do when we trust and accept the trust of others. So, for example, considering that trust involves beliefs, one on the capacity and goodwill of the counterpart, values, desires of or love values, and practical intentions, renouncing to agency and practical intelligence. Considering this, we can ask, why should we trust or distrust the persons or groups to which we belong, or with which we collaborate directly or indirectly. We can raise this question on rational grounds. That's the idea. And thirdly, that examining the rationality of trust makes it possible to adopt a critical attitude toward domination and manipulation in our social relationships. So we can ask, how, in who, and for the sake of what should we trust? And this problem, I will claim, is especially relevant in situations where violence proliferates. What hope does someone has in trusting me? What hope do I have when I honor her trust? It doesn't make sense to trust someone or to honor her trust if with that I don't hope something, be it something valuable as an object of joy or as the result of love. So that's the end. The idea is that we usually claim that hope is always, well, hope and trust are always positive, but I wanted to suggest that they are positive when they are rational, but also a critical stance toward the loyalties and trust that structures our life is of great ethical relevance, even when it might incline us to break some of these relationships or to build others. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this great talk. Personally, I find it very, very relevant in philosophical counseling. I mean, understanding deeply the structure of hope and trust in all its dynamic, as you were saying, when hope is irrational, then it creates problems. And so it's good for the counselor, if he's trained in phenomenology, to go there and poke and understand where the irrationality is and what is covering up. So yeah, I think this investigation is really, really helpful in practically working with philosophy. Yeah, questions, Alice, please.
Yeah, first of all, really thank you. It's really interesting, and I'm happy that we are working on very close fields. So I completely agree with you with the importance of stressing the emotional elements of rationality, of practical rationality. And I find it very interesting how you described hope as a moving, I would describe it as a moving motor of rationality, like the inner motor of practical rationality. And it's interesting because normally, so in classical philosophy, hope is often described as a blind, as a blind emotion, as something that blinds us. And it's, I think it's, yes, it's important where the work you're doing in showing us that we could be blind when we give up our hopes, and the same applies to trust. At first I was somehow skeptical on the connection, on why you were putting together hope and trust. I thought it is perhaps a way to pull trust more in the field of emotions or feelings, and less and stressing less its cognitive elements. But in the way you described it, it was actually not the case. Still, I was struck by a remark that you made at the beginning. You said you want to describe trust and hope as not as empirical phenomena, I think you said. And this is important because it is the basis of our phenomenological work, to find a different level to describe phenomena which is not an empirical level. And you say they are not just empirical sentiments or state of minds, they are attitudes. And then at the end you said hopes makes possible to act rationally. So all these expressions are going in the direction of saying hope and trust are like transcendental phenomena. And I was wondering if you would agree on such a description. And I was thinking you don't want to say the word, and I'm going to spell the word for you and ask you to comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I think they are transcendental, but not in the Kantian sense, but in the Husserlian sense. I think they are sense-bestowing activities or living experiences. What I wanted to say, the point I wanted to make by saying that they are not empirical, or not that they are not empirical, but the claim is more that I didn't made a research on how hope takes place in Mexico and the United States and Italy and Germany, and then in the indigenous communities, because I am sure this will have different forms. It's probably shaped culturally, mixed with religion, with other beliefs, with rituals, practicals, I don't know, morals, empirical morals. But what I wanted to do is to begin with the question of what does we need, what is necessary. Perhaps this is in some sense Kantian. What are the necessary conditions for acting rationally, given that we do not have certainties concerning the outcomes of our actions, and given that we often root for possibilities that are not the most likely, and so on. So yeah, perhaps I have to think this more carefully. I think it has some Kantian, in some Kantian sense, it can be said to be transcendental because it is deductive. But my effort was to think of hope and trust much in the way as when we consider beliefs, like not empirical beliefs, also from a phenomenological perspective, but what does it make a belief rational? So in that sense, structural and yes, I think transcendental. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Is there any other question? We still have time for one more question.
Oh, hello. So I have a question because you juxtapose certain attitudes of betrayal and domination, especially with vulnerability. So my question is, those feelings, and you also mentioned honor, like what do I have to honor the trust of another person? Even though you adopt these like rational and these critical attitude of hope and trust, how does I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on like the dominating factor of it, because people will automatically fleet to hope in those situations of trust.
Yeah, thanks. The idea is that to dominate someone, and with this I mean to make someone do something that one wishes forcefully, one has to be able to trust the nominated person. This might seem sometimes counterintuitive, but the idea is I cannot give order to somebody who I do not trust that will fulfill my orders, or I cannot prescribe laws to someone who I do not trust that will comply with these laws. So the idea, and this is connected with a point I didn't elaborate much on, which is that to respond to the trust of someone by honoring this trust, I don't mean honoring in the sense of honor as a moral quality, but responding and fulfilling the trust that somebody places on us makes it possible to to have any sort of social relationships, including those of domination. If one is not trustworthy, one can be eliminated by violence, or can suffer different kinds of, well, can be harmed by violence, but not dominated. Of course, the idea is that trust can be forced. I mean, when one gives orders to somebody who doesn't want to fulfill these orders, but fulfills it because of he fears or she fears the consequences of not complying, this sort of trust is a forced trust. I make sure that you understand that if you don't fulfill my order, I will take other measures. But by doing that, I can be confident that I can trust you. So the idea is that when we accept the trust of others, we accept to engage with those persons in social relationships. They can be symmetric social relationships, but they can be also domination social relationships. Of course, the answer is not to. I mean, one cannot simply abstractly do not respond to the trust of somebody that menaces one, but one can at least be aware of this character of trust, and how it is the building block of all social relationships, including those of domination. And I think in some domestic relationships, this point can be relevant, because we usually assume that the trust is something positive, and we do not see that sometimes by trusting and also by being trustworthy by others, or by responding to the trust of others, we are putting ourselves in a situation which is not good for us.
Thank you. I just wanted a little bit more of elaboration on that, because I thought it was interesting with when you bring up trust with betrayal, and then honors of being obliged to do something, and also in line with domination. It does seem like there is that the intersubjectivity involved with those things are like they're encapsulated. So whether you're aware of not there, and you are implying a lot of hope in the situation. You're also we didn't really talk too much. You didn't really talk too much about vulnerability in a sense,
yeah.
But the abuse that can occur, especially in domestic relationships. So thank you for the elaboration.
Yeah, I think the idea is that vulnerability is not something that can be like taken off of trust. If you trust someone, you necessarily make yourself vulnerable before that person that you trust. That cannot be avoided. If you do not become vulnerable before the other person, then you don't trust her. However, it doesn't make sense always to become vulnerable before other persons, because of this other dimension of the domination and violence. Yeah, thanks.
I just think it's a little funny, but thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I'm really happy you accepted my invitation, our invitation, and I think it can have plenty of directions of application in our daily life. Yeah. Thanks again,
Thank you very much
for being here.
Thank you very much again for the invitation. I'm sorry, my English is a little bit rusty because I haven't practiced like in 3 years.
Well, I cannot
speaking at least
say anything on the topic. I have my strong Italian accent on my end. So thank you so much again.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day. Bye.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.